You're listening to the Broadway Podcast Network.
How powerful is the Cox Network? So powerful that one day, the internet will let your doctor perform miracles from thousands of miles away.
Connecting to remote operating room.
Giving a whole new meaning to the term house call.
Operation complete.
The Cox Network. With gig speeds everywhere, it's internet built for tomorrow, today. Cox, bringing us closer. In Cox serviceable areas, speeds vary and are not guaranteed. Cox terms apply. Other restrictions may apply. How powerful is the Cox Network? So powerful that one day, the internet will let your doctor perform miracles from thousands of miles away.
Connecting to remote operating room.
Giving a whole new meaning to the term house call.
Operation complete.
The Cox Network. With gig speeds everywhere, it's internet built for tomorrow, today. Cox, bringing us closer. In Cox serviceable areas, speeds vary and are not guaranteed. Cox terms apply. Other restrictions may apply.
There was a specific project for me that taught me how to think about different metrics of success. And on that specific project, it was talking to certain people who had come to see the show and to whom the show was really meaningful. Then I was like, okay, on this particular show, my metric of success is what this group of audience members felt coming out of this show. If that's always the way that you sort of approach making art, then everything will be successful in some way.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Was It Chance, the podcast about embracing opportunity and taking intentional risk for your creative life. I'm Heather Vickery.
And I'm Alan Seals, and Heather and I started off as two perfect strangers who met by chance and just embraced an opportunity and started a podcast. Listen in as we chat with other successful people about the risks they've taken to put themselves on a path to creative success. So we actually have, Heather, two guests today, not just one. This is
exciting.
Our first double guester, and they're talking about a film that they made together, and so I want to actually read about the film before I get into who they are. So in my best, coming this summer voice, here we go, and I've got some music for us too. In the wake of the global pandemic, The Show Must Go On chronicles the race against time to save live theater and focuses in on some of the some of the theater makers determined to win it. In March of 2020, and for the first time in history, the performing arts were decimated worldwide when theater shut down indefinitely in every country except one, South Korea. From the frontlines in Seoul, the film follows a company of artists involved in two theatrical productions, the world tour of Phantom of the Opera and the South Korean tour of Cats, two of the productions that pushed ahead safely during the pandemic.
Wow. It is too early for that, Alan.
And a continent away in the UK. The film simultaneously follows Andrew Lloyd Webber, composer of Cats and the Phantom of the Opera, among much else. He uses the example set by his Korean colleagues to fight for the theater's future on the West End and beyond. The Show Must Go On chronicles the survival of the performing arts and worldwide resuscitation of an art form. All right, that's enough Cats for me. The Show Must Go On, co-directed and produced by both Dori Berinstein, and Sammi Cannold.
This is what happens when I let Alan do all of the pre-work.
More coffee. Sammi Berinstein. Have you ever been called that before, Sammi?
I've never been called that. That's a wild hybrid. Oh my.
This is worlds colliding for me, and I am so happy. Heather, podcaster, Dori, podcaster, business partner, producer, Broadway lover, Sammi, producer, director, podcaster. All of this is coming together in such a fun way, and we'll get into bios later because you guys both have bios that are longer than my arms. But I want to talk about The Show Must Go On because this is a documentary, and Sammi, this is your first documentary. Dori, this is your umpteenth million documentary. So where did the two of you even get the idea to start recording this, filming this, making this?
Sorry, it cut out. I don't know what you asked. I'll move to the other room though.
In a world where Sammi doesn't have good Wi-Fi, She has to move to another room.
I'm moving to the other room.
Well, so while Sammi is moving to the other room, this show is about embracing opportunity, taking intentional risks to be creative. And hopefully that leads us to success, but it leads us to creativity, which is something that we had to go out of our way to have during the pandemic. And I think that's one of what I love the most about your documentary is you brought all of those things together. So yeah, I'm with Alan. I want to know how this came to be.
Well, exactly what you're talking about. I mean, Sammi will go into detail, but in essence, there were people all over the world when theater shut down that came to Korea to keep theater alive, to put the show on, and we wanted to celebrate that. We wanted to document that.
At the beginning of the pandemic, I was alone in my apartment, very bummed out that our life form had sort of just disappeared. There was no theater makers all around the world were sort of confused about what to do, how to make a living. That's not news to anybody here. I was FaceTiming with my friend, Kristen Blodgett, who is the musical supervisor of Phantom of the Opera World Tour, and she supervises a lot of the Cats tours that go out around the world. This was June of 2020, and she said at some point in our FaceTime, in a few weeks I'm actually going to South Korea to mount the South Korean tour of Cats. And I was dumbfounded because at the time, nobody was going anywhere, let alone going anywhere to do theater. I was asking, how is that possible? I'd heard that, the Phantom of the Opera was, at the time that it opened in Korea, the only large-scale English language production running anywhere in the world. So I knew that something was going on in South Korea, but didn't quite realize that it was the country that was sort of like keeping musical theater alive. I immediately was like, this has to be documented. And I went to Dori, who also happens to be my mother, and, because she's a very experienced documentarian. And I said, I've never made a documentary before. Do you want to partner on this? Because I can get on a plane and go to Korea, but I don't know what I'm doing. And you know what you're doing. So maybe we have sort of a way to work together here. And she said yes immediately. And then we wrote to Andrew Lloyd Webber and we said, hey, can we document what your productions are doing in Korea? And he said yes, and all the other parties said yes. And then we were sort of off and running from there.
We had that question. My partner and I watched the documentary last night. We couldn't quite figure out if people were filming their own things, if you had the idea after and you just worked really hard to piece these things together. So you actually went and filmed this live. Wow.
There was a crew with you.
Couldn't have been much of one.
I think it was much more ragtag than you'd think. First of all, this was June and July of 2020. There was no vaccine. We were all quarantined. Nobody was going anywhere. And it's not like, hey, let's hire a crew. Let's go to Korea. It wasn't like that. It was much more kind of daredevil and getting on a plane.
Yeah.
Which Sammi did. We really had 3 weeks prep, which is crazy for a doc. You just don't have 3 weeks prep. I had been shooting a doc in Korea pre-pandemic and did have a shooter on the ground that, because it was the pandemic, he was available and was willing to take this on. But, we kind of threw ourselves into this without having any real plan in place other than getting thumbs up and yeses from people. We had to figure it out as everything unfolded. And Sammi was frontline and really, went into this not knowing what was ahead, never having done a doc, never having shot anything before. And she had to figure it out as she went along. And so it really was kind of crazy. In answer to your question, we immediately contacted the casts of both shows and asked that they document their own travel to Korea as they were coming from South Africa and the Philippines and Australia and the UK and the United States, from all over the world descending on South Korea to help save theater. And so we asked them to document their own travel moments. And then we pick up with them in Korea.
I have 4 daughters, and I'm very curious as a mother, right? and a artist and a creator and a producer and all of these amazing things you do. The show must go on, no pun intended. But the mother side of you, sending your child out into this pandemic world, like, what was that like for you?
That's a really good question. One, there was no stopping her. Two, it was very clear that things were only getting worse in New York, and Sammi was smack in the middle of New York City, and things in Korea, as we document in the film, were at the time far more under control. I mean, there was still COVID being, spread all over the place, but I felt that she'll go into detail about being embedded with both productions, but that it was actually a safer place. And it also would give her purpose. And it was we felt very strongly it was a very important moment to capture. For all those reasons, it was not easy wearing the mom hat. It was torture having her so far away from me every single day, every single moment. But it was the right thing to do as her business partner. And it was also wearing the mom hat again. I felt she was in a relatively safer situation.
I think I was also just driving her nuts, calling every day, just being like, what is my life's purpose? I can't make theater. And she was like, okay, well, we need to get her busy doing something.
I can see the mom side of that.
Accurate.
Yeah.
That is so accurate. Yes.
But something you said, as I watched the show, I found myself getting re-angry at the way the pandemic was handled here in the United States because of how Korea handled it, which was, they really mitigated it well, and we didn't. So you were probably better off, Sammi.
Sammi, what was that like for you going out there and being able to, like, literally, when we see in the documentary, you sit down with Andrew Lloyd Webber and you're talking with him, and he's probably, like, was he in South Korea the whole time, or did he just fly out? Or, like, that whole process of working with the team and, like what Dori was saying, being embedded with the cast, right? So I guess, did you become part of their bubble? And what was that like for you, just sitting out there watching this happen in somewhat of it sounds like it was somewhat of a normal tech opening process in this country that actually handled it way better than the U.S. did.
Yeah. So I, when I got to Korea, I had to quarantine for 2 weeks in a government facility. And basically what that meant was that I was put in a hotel room. I was not allowed to leave the hotel room. I was told that if I left, I would be deported. They brought 3 meals a day. They came to the room and tested us. It was, it was pretty intense. And then once I was out, then I was in the bubble. I started with the Cats Company, and I would sort of switch back and forth between the Cats Company and the Phantom Company at different times. Each time there was sort of a process to make sure that I wasn't being a bridge between the two companies, because that would also be sort of problematic. The companies were not integrated, but it was amazing because I, as a director, a theater director, I never get to go on tour. It's not, unless you're like a resident on a tour, it's very rare that theater directors get to go on tour. And all of a sudden I was like getting to live my best life on a Cats tour. Like, it was just, a very bizarre, gift and experience in that way. And the Andrew portion of it, we actually shot that in London. So when I was done in Korea, I stayed there for 3 months. And then once we were done shooting in Korea, I flew to London where there was no quarantine. Then I interviewed Andrew there and did some other shoots that are in the film there in London. Because part of what we were trying to communicate in the film is that Korea really pioneered how to reopen. And then London learned from Korea, and then we learned from London. And I think that memorializing how that happened is really important to me. And I know to Dori as well, like that theatrical history documents that in this moment of need, it was South Korea that led the way.
That's so cool. You mentioned something that you stayed in a government facility. So did you have to get government permission to do this? Or was it just like anybody coming in from certain countries had to quarantine and the government monitored it? Or like, were they involved with the process at all other than just quarantining?
Yeah, in my case, it was just sort of like, I just showed up and I had to fill out some paperwork ahead of time, but it wasn't like I didn't get special permission. because during the pandemic, you were allowed to go to Korea without a visa if it was for under 90 days. So that's why I left at the culmination of 3 months. I would have kept living in Korea because it was great. I mean, it was like functional. But the Cats company and the Phantom company, everybody working in those companies, they all had visas. And so the government knew there were these people from all over the world that were coming in and were cool with it and excited about it. And really, it's the Korean government kept theaters open when it seemed like they wouldn't. There was a time while I was there where professional sports teams were not allowed to practice, but theater could happen. There was a time where nursery schools were shut down,
Wow.
but theater was allowed to stay open. It was just, the government recognized that the way protocol work in the theater makes the theater uniquely safe when compared to other public activities, and allowed it to stay open.
All right, so we're relocating Broadway to South Korea. I think that's the
I think that's the message.
that's the most logical thing.
So, Dori, what were you working on while Sammi was in South Korea? I'm sure you found lots of ways to stay busy, but what was happening for you? Where were you, and what was happening for you?
I basically didn't move from this spot for 2 years. Almost. There was a lot. There actually was quite a bit of shooting that we did in the tri-state area. I was capturing things locally. I was also producing from afar because obviously we had to manage all the crew. We also had to manage the footage that was coming in and bring on an editorial team, manage all the footage and figure out how we were going to capture it, figure out all the rights issues, the music issues, everything that was around putting this film together. There was a tremendous amount to do, not to mention raising the financing for it.
Yeah.
And because it, obviously this all costs money to do. We have tremendous partners on this project that really from the get-go said, we're in. We want this to happen. We want to support this. And Liz Armstrong was there day one, and so grateful for that. And WYSIWYG, executive producer and WYSIWYG in South Korea, also joined forces with us, and we're so grateful to both of them.
Heather, I want to also point out that both of these two individuals we are talking to today are two of the most humble, non-braggery people ever that you will meet. So Dori Berinstein is an Emmy Award-winning documentarian, 4-time Tony Award-winning Broadway producer, Olivier Award winner, and most recently joined Ryan Murphy as the producer of Golden Globe Award-nominated Netflix feature adaptation of her musical The Prom, and also co-founded Broadway Podcast Network with me and is the CEO. Sammi
Just a few things.
Just a few things. Sammi is a director who's one of Forbes magazine's 30 Under 30 and worked for CBS, Nickelodeon, Paramount Plus, Cirque du Soleil. We mentioned this is her first documentary feature, but now has new projects including musicals, revivals, feature films. She's been an associate director on Great Comet with Josh Groban. I mean, come on. These two people are like, you asked Dori what she's doing. All she answered was about this project.
Had a hard time staying busy.
No, what I'm saying is Dori's not going to be the one to tell you everything she was doing because we have to say what she's doing. And Sammi too. The two of them are like, I've never met two people, by the way, Heather, that are they have the least amount of ego in this business. Show business is all about ego, and these two people do it for the art of creating and for the love of theater, not for themselves. And that's so fucking rare in this business from a creative standpoint.
I think that showed in the documentary.
Thanks, guys.
That it's about creativity.
It's so nice.
And one of the exciting things that we went through, Dori, and this applied to sort of everything, is as the pandemic hit, we're launching a podcast network. We have to figure out how to go virtual, how to record over the internet, how to exist without in-person opportunities. And so I remember Sammi, like it was opening night of, I think it was Cats, right? Where it was one of the early days of figuring out how to record people remotely. We had you interviewing, who were you interviewing in the house before the house opened on opening night?
Kristen Blodgett.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's right. That's
Yeah.
right, Alan. Thank you. Yeah, that was a beautiful moment in the film, and thank you for making that happen.
Yeah. So, you're welcome. We had to figure out how to capture on the fly last minute. It was, we're 12-hour difference or something, whatever it was. So it's literally like the morning time here in New York, and it's you're literally getting kicked out of the house.
You woke up very early to do that.
Hey friends, do you feel like there's just never enough, right? Never enough time, energy, money, passion, patience, peace, rest. Just never enough of whatever it is that you want. Well, guess what? I'm not just Alan's feisty sidekick on Was It Chance? I'm also a transformational success coach. And I'm really excited to invite you to a 5-day Creating Abundance Challenge that I have coming up on April 10th through the 14th. I will be helping you go from not enough to more than enough. This is a super easy, fun, bite-sized way to get started on your journey to learning to like and trust yourself and build a life that you are madly in love with. You can get all the details and learn everything about the 5-day Creating Abundance Challenge by visiting my website, vickeryandco.com. That's vickeryandco.com. I'll see you there.
How powerful is the Cox network? So powerful that one day the internet will let your doctor perform miracles from thousands of miles away.
Connecting to remote operating room.
Giving a whole new meaning to the term house call.
Operation complete.
The Cox network. With gig speeds everywhere, it's internet built for tomorrow, today. Cox, bringing us closer. In Cox serviceable areas, speeds vary and are not guaranteed. Cox terms apply. Other restrictions may apply.
And so it's I love the chance encounter of all of this because again, like this is the time, don't be humble, right? We want to know. I mean, you're just like, yeah, I just contacted Andrew Lloyd Webber. Like everybody just can't contact Andrew Lloyd Webber, right? So you just contacted this guy who a couple people have heard of, and you just happen to get these producers, and then you just happen to fly out there, and then along the way, looking back, what are some of the biggest chances that both of you were able to embrace to really pull this project together and make it come together?
You mentioned at the beginning a lot of what you talk about on this podcast is about taking risks, and I think that it was a huge risk to go make this film. We didn't know if Phantom and Cats were going to make it. We didn't know if Cats was going to open. We didn't know if Phantom was going to stay open. In fact, both shows were basically able to survive Korea. Phantom then went to Taiwan, but then it had a whole leg of its tour in China that had to be called off because of COVID. And so we felt very lucky that there was actually something to document, because I could have showed up in Korea and both shows could have been shut down,
Yeah.
Talk about risk.
Yeah, it was just sort of like, what are we going to find? And we sort of came to the conclusion that, like, if that was what happened, we would document that too. We just wanted to capture a moment in time and how a community was sort of approaching it and struggling with it. And I think from a dramatic storytelling perspective, I'm very grateful that the film ends on a note of triumph and on a note of inspiring others to follow suit. But it could have been a very different film. I think a lot had to be put on the table with hope and confidence from all involved parties, and we're really grateful for that.
I'm just going to add that I think that on the risk-taking front, when there were limitations on how we could capture in what was going on in Korea, we were allowed to have a crew of 2, and that included Sammi. So we had a shooter and we had Sammi, and we had a giant musical and a huge cast. And that, having done many documentaries about theater, that's not how you do it. And Sammi wasn't a shooter. She had never done this before. And so, in terms of risk creatively as well as practically, kind of just to dive into this situation in a foreign country with a crew she hadn't worked with before, and earn everyone's trust so that they were comfortable with her capturing all the behind the scenes of two separate companies and learning how to shoot and do, all that she had to do. It's quite extraordinary. She's not going to say it, but I will say it for her. And I think when you look at the film, it's certainly, it's a little scrappy, as it should be under the circumstances. But, given the reality of how it was captured, it's extraordinary, I think, that we really were able to tell this story and capture sound. Oh my goodness, just basically capture sound, capture the visuals, and have everyone on board to being part of this, and kind of Herculean. And what a partner is all I can say. What a partner.
I love that. Sammi, I'd be curious to know, while you were on the ground in Korea, I mean, what chance opportunities presented themselves that you didn't anticipate? You're like, oh, we're going to lean in this way. Oh, I'm going to do it like this.
We had a very funny phrase, because there were a lot of Australians working on both shows. And in Australia, you call a documentary a doco, which I find very funny. So we had a saying when anything bad would happen, because I would always just grab the camera right away and start filming. And I would sort of get excited when bad things would happen, which is sick, but it would be like, I would be like, that's drama. And these aren't like people dying bad things. They're like, theatrically speaking, bad things. I
broke a shoelace.
Exactly. I'd be like, oh my God, drama. We had this phrase that was like, bad for the humans, good for the doco. So anytime anything bad would happen, we'd go like, bad for the humans, good for the doco. The biggest one of those was basically that when the Phantom Tour when I got there, the Phantom Tour was finishing up in Seoul, and it was about to go to another Korean city called Daegu. And Daegu was the epicenter of the outbreak of COVID in South Korea. It was one of the first cities in the world, to get significantly hit. So it was a really big deal that Phantom was coming back to Daegu, that it was reopening the city. And just as Phantom was about to go from Seoul to Daegu, numbers started to go up again. It got very, very dramatic very quickly. Obviously, that was difficult for the Phantom company, but it was very dramatic for the camera.
The power of television.
Yeah, it's we were not there, because Phantom opened in Korea on April 1st, 2020. And if I had the, foresight to know to be there on April 1st, 2020, certainly we would have been there. But all of that, the 2 COVID cases that came up in the Phantom company, which is a large part of what we follow in the Phantom storyline in the film, all of that happened before I got there. But through the generosity of the company members sharing iPhone footage with us, through, other things that through interviews, we were able to sort of document that part of it retroactively, and then everything after June in real time.
What's the chance of, I guess, Dori, from your experience, using iPhones? Because Sammi just mentioned the iPhone footage, and when we've been on shoots together, you're always capturing 4K footage with your iPhone 26, whatever it is, and like back in the day, literally back in the day, like 5-6 years ago, you couldn't use footage off of cameras like this.
I do it all the time. There are apps that allow you to capture 4K footage on your iPhone. I'm shooting other docs right now, and I particularly in situations where you have to be a little discreet. You can't have a whole crew behind you, or you're on the move, or something happens spontaneously. You have a real good quality camera with you. I think the problem is more that it's you don't have the sound support that you need to really capture something incredible. So it's supplementary. But, I've often, when I know I'm in a shoot where I have great sound, I'll be the fourth camera, or I'll be the second camera, or whatever, with my iPhone. And that footage has consistently been great. I love it. And it's all over the movie that you saw. The Show Must Go On.
What's one of the biggest apparent setbacks when the two of you started to film and put footage together, and things where you're like, I don't know how we're going to overcome this, that you all of a sudden turned around, you're like, oh, this is great, actually. We can pivot this way, and all of a sudden it becomes this great thing?
Well, interestingly, we were only originally going to follow the Cats company because that's what was happening in real time. I mean, their process was happening in real time. And then there were some like travel complications. Things got a little complicated. And Gareth Hewitt-Williams, who's in the film quite a lot, who is producer, general manager extraordinaire, who really is a large part of why these shows succeeded. He said, do you want to follow Phantom 2? That's kind of like the big one. Not that Cats isn't the big one, but that was the one that succeeded when all else was not open. We were like, oh, duh. Like, why didn't we think of that ourselves? And so that was how we ended up following both shows, not just one.
Oh, that's great.
And the film itself premiered in the Majestic Theater, which is home to Phantom here in New York.
We really wanted to help bring Broadway back, and having the event at the Majestic was just really just so meaningful to all of us, to help welcome Phantom back to, kind of a post-COVID world, even though it wasn't post-COVID, and to help let the world know that Broadway was back. It was just an epic night, and we, were so fortunate to have incredible performers that joined us that night. Adrienne Warren and Ariana DeBose and Josh Groban and Sierra Boggess and on and on and on, that helped us welcome not just Broadway back, but a giant audience that hadn't been in the theater for over 2.5 years. It was quite a thrilling night.
One of the things that you said a second ago, Sammi, we have seen a consistent theme with everyone we've interviewed on this show, where your community, your network, the people that you choose to spend your time with always has this tremendous ripple effect in your opportunities, your chances, your creativity. And I just love seeing that come full circle. Like, that's how Phantom became part of your show, part of your film. And for listeners, I just want them to know how powerful that is. Talk to people, know people, make friends, not because you want something from them, but because you want to grow your soul community. And soul community, no pun intended. And then you just kind of never know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things I'm most grateful for on this film is just the people from all over the world that, we got to meet and work with, and our Korean partners, and our partners in London, and our partners in Australia. And I think it's a reminder that the theater community, the entertainment community is global. And sometimes we are so, Broadway centric. And I think it's important to remember that we are a global community, and there are people all around the world who are amazing, who, we can be in conversation with.
I want to pivot and back up on the general industry of show business and Broadway and TV and film and whatnot. And Dori, I want to get into your history in a second, because you originally went into finance before all of this bullshit in business. So we'll get to that. But Sammi, as growing up with all of this around you, was there ever did you ever want to do anything else? And then at what point were you like, I'm going to take a chance and just try to make it in this business where it's literally next to impossible to make it?
Yeah, it's funny. I was so lucky that, my childhood, I was like immersed in all things Broadway. I just hung out in the back of the theater. I was doing homework and rehearsals. It was just like, what a gift of an upbringing. And early on, my parents sort of identified directing before I even knew what directing was. Not that they, pushed it on me, but I would do this thing where they would bring back little shampoo bottles from hotel rooms, and I would put on little shows with the shampoo bottles on the bathroom counter. It's like, and so very early, the word director was like always sort of associated with me. It was like, oh, she's going to be a director, she's going to be, or whatever. And then I had these like bizarre opportunities when I was in middle school to like direct little I'm doing quotations with my hands, you can see it. Little productions with fellow middle schoolers. The drama was that when I was in high school, I had a little period of revolt where I was just not having it with the idea of doing what my parents did. I was like, I don't want people to say, oh, she has a career because, her parents are producers or whatever. Like, I just didn't like the narrative of it. I wanted to make my own way. So I made a hard left turn, and I thought I was going to go into education policy.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. Quite a distinction. I went to college for a combination of education policy and international relations because I sort of wanted to do something international. And
was that Stanford or Harvard? No joke.
Stanford.
Right. Okay.
Stanford.
You help because you have a BA
Yeah.
from Stanford and an MA from Harvard. Just putting that out there for the listeners.
Yeah. I'm fortunate. Yeah. 3 weeks into college, I was like, oh, I have to get over my little revolt because theater is what I'm meant to do, not education policy. No offense to education policy. The irony is now I'm sort of working a little bit in education policy and international relations. So it all comes back around. But
That's great.
Everything, I think that's part of the beauty of being an artist is that things from, all corners of your life can sort of merge into what you're doing.
Dori, on your end, talk about going into college, going into finance, and realizing, this isn't for me.
Well, I never, ever, ever had any intention of having a career in finance. That was never going to be me. Was not where my passion was. And my passion was definitely, I'd say it was split between the arts, theater, television, film. I wanted to be a storyteller. I had no talent to be on stage and knew no one at all. And so figuring out how to, I had no exposure to the behind the curtain of it all, had no idea how to become somebody in that world. And when I was graduating from college, all of the mentors that I had, my parents, they said, you need to get a foundation in business and finance. And whatever you end up doing, that's going to serve you well. And I had no way into the world of theater. I had no way into the world of film and television. I didn't know anybody, and I was writing all these cold letters to people. And I thought, this will be a good thing in the long run. And there was an opportunity to interview for a job that was considered, a hot job in that world at Morgan Stanley in mergers and acquisitions, and was fortunate enough to get it and was thrown into the fire. Oh my goodness, that was intense, and learned so much. So it was like an amazing education in business and finance and strategic planning. And I am so grateful I did it, but not for 1 second did I ever think this is what I'll be doing. This was laying the groundwork for, a knowledge that will come in handy when I really get to do what I really want to do.
I mean, hugely beneficial in producing. Obviously, numbers are really important.
No, it gives you, just a comfort level. It's not an area that scares me at all. And I think without that experience, without that training, it may have, whether or not it would have been, it would have felt a little bit more daunting. And it isn't to me. So that helps.
For both of you looking back across your careers thus far, and both of you have long careers ahead of you still, what is one of the earliest things that you can each remember where it was like one of the biggest risks where you're like, if this doesn't work, I don't know what I'm going to do? And then on the flip side of that, something that didn't work that you were able to turn into triumph, that you were able to take advantage of and push forward using the benefit of the, I'll put in air quotes, initial failure. And I would say a pandemic is actually pretty high on the list of things that, screw things up and make people need to adapt.
Other than the pandemic. Yeah.
I'll say in the first category, the very first thing that I directed in New York was a concert rendition of Ragtime that was site-specific on Ellis Island. And originally, the idea was to sort of test out the music on the island, like with friends around a piano. And then it kind of just snowballed because we asked Laura Michelle Kelly to play Mother. and didn't expect her to say yes, and then she said yes, and we were like, oh no, like now it's like a really big deal. And so then we had to sort of like find other actors who were sort of at her caliber, and it snowballed and it got really, really big, and it was being followed by a lot of press. And I was 22. No, I was 21. And, and I was very stressed out by the idea that it could succeed or fail. I was like, oh, my life will look really different if this succeeds or this fails. And I think that's sort of like a bit of a melodramatic thing that a lot of emerging artists take on, where they're like, if this show doesn't, get good reviews, my life is over, and I think I've since learned that maybe that's a little bit too dramatic, but it definitely certainly felt that way at the time. And I often when you're in it, I feel like most artists can relate to that. It does feel that way. You're like, oh, the world is over if this doesn't go.
Oh yeah,
if this doesn't go well.
Whatever you're experiencing in the moment feels like the biggest thing you've ever experienced, I think, in so many cases. Yeah.
Dori, I know you're thinking hard.
Oh my goodness, I don't even know where to begin on that. I think that early on I learned that it was all about storytelling, and I wanted, and it wasn't about the platform. And I was very fortunate early on to have many, many different experiences in so many different realms, whether it was film or television or special effects or, whatever it was, that I became very platform agnostic. And I'm going to talk about meeting podcaster Alan Seals. I
love this story, actually.
I was in, I had produced The Prom, and we went down to Google to have an exciting afternoon at Google Talks. And I met this guy who was running Google Talks, and we just started to talk. And I think it was one of those moments where, you meet somebody, and it sounds like the same thing happened with the two of you, where we just started, we ended up getting together to just chat about our shared love of podcasts. And it was like, hey, let's start a podcast network. And I think because of having so many different experiences in film and television, special effects, and all these different worlds, that it, not for one second, I think for either of us, was it daunting that, wait a minute, I don't know anything about podcasting, like nothing. I just listened to them. It never occurred to me to think, well, maybe I better think about what I'm agreeing to do here, and what does it mean to run a podcast network, and what's involved in that, and who is this guy? I just met him. There wasn't anything normal about the situation, but yet we just said, let's do this, and we were off and running, and we did it. And it's been a tremendous partnership and a wonderful, I think the Broadway Podcast Network has had great success, and also it really is a labor of love. So, I think being fearless a little bit, maybe ignorant, maybe naive, but
or
just throwing
willing.
yourself into, throwing yourself into various fires and just, seeing what happens. And I think the film is very much like that too. We didn't know what was going to unfold or if it was going to work or anything. And, to me, those kind of ventures are very thrilling. They're really exciting because you have to, in the moment, figure out how to make it work. And the Broadway Podcast Network, every step of the way, is figuring out how to make it work and reinventing, and it's extremely challenging, as was this film, but it's also extremely satisfying.
How powerful is the Cox Network? So powerful that one day, the internet will let your doctor perform miracles from thousands of miles away.
Connecting to remote operating room.
Giving a whole new meaning to the term house call.
Operation complete.
The Cox Network. With gig speeds everywhere, it's internet built for tomorrow, today. Cox, bringing us closer. In Cox serviceable areas, speeds vary and are not guaranteed. Cox terms apply. Other restrictions may apply.
I want to point out, too, that I've said, remember, that Dori is not one to brag, Heather. And every now and then we'll just be talking and we're like, oh, yeah, so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. And Dori's like, well, here's a picture of me with that person from like 20 years ago.
Yeah, but you
And
do
that's
the
it.
same thing.
No, this is different. Like Fred Savage, I want to say, but look in the video, and we'll post this video online. So behind Dori's head are two green gloves. Those are from Shrek the Musical, right? Those are the Shrek gloves, and then right in between is a little gray glove that is from Little Monsters, because Dori was part of the production team that made Little Monsters happen. And before that, if you watch the movies Who Made Us on Netflix, Dori is interviewed because she was part of the Dirty Dancing team that made that happen.
I get messages all the time from people who say, I just watched the story of how you were born on Netflix, because in that special, they tell the story. I know. My parents met working on Dirty Dancing. So they in that Netflix special, they tell the story of how they met and, fell in love. It's very personal. It's a little weird. It's on Netflix.
But it is.
That is not what we talked about. I think that was a little manipulative of the team that made that and they went into
the way it's edited, it is like a love story.
And we were only there to talk about the creation of the film. So liberties were taken, I must say, and I'm sure that's a little awkward for Sammi.
Well, so my point of bringing all this up is that you've got these milestones where you're like, we've literally changed the world. We've made this movie, and we've made that show, and we've done this, and these are movies that shaped movies and shows that have shaped people's entire lives,
Yes.
because it influences them in their childhood. But on the flip side, what people don't want to ask about, what people don't talk about, are all the things that don't work.
Yeah.
Because everything that you put out there everything that anyone puts out there doesn't automatically work. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of risk, a lot of pivoting when failure is about to hit or does hit, whatever that case is. So I guess, like, for both of you too, do you each have one of these moments where you're like, I don't want to talk about that anymore, this is horrible, I'm gonna ask you to talk about it, but do you not want to talk about anything that you're like, okay, I've learned from this, I know not to do that again, this has been an experience that I will take and improve upon next time, but no one needs to know about it?
Yeah.
So let's know about
or
it.
even a failure that turned out so much better than what you had planned.
I try never to think of any given project as a failure, even if it didn't turn out as I wanted it to, because it's a question of how do we measure success? Like, because I think that when I first started getting reviewed as a theater director, it like crushed me, because I was like, oh, you work for years on one thing, and then some person you don't know says something about it, and that is the mark of whether or not it's successful. There was a specific project for me that taught me how to think about different metrics of success. And on that specific project, it was talking to certain people who had come to see the show and to whom the show was really meaningful. Then I was like, okay, on this particular show, my metric of success is what this group of audience members felt coming out of this show. That to me makes me feel like it was successful. And I think if that's always the way that you sort of approach something like that, like approach making art, then everything will be successful in some way. It's just the metric might change.
For me, one example would be The Prom, which it was the hardest theater project I ever worked on in terms of getting it to Broadway, because of the subject matter was very challenging for a lot of people, and it shouldn't be, and that's why we were making it. But our metric at the beginning, and obviously the show made it to Broadway. The show was wildly successful in so many ways on Broadway. The show became a major motion picture, and now is touring the country and all of that. And so, to Sammi's point, speaking about metrics, it was never about, how many awards can we win. It was never about how, we wanted, of course, to do justice to our investors and make money and do well in that way, but it was not about that. We were going to do everything we could to be successful in all those ways. But the metrics for us in the very beginning, it was so much about wanting to change the world and wanting for there to be acceptance and tolerance when it came to LGBTQ issues and same-sex marriage and all that. We wanted to have the show in schools in every single city around the country, which is about to happen. Where parents who obviously wouldn't go see the show or wouldn't watch the movie had to go because their kids are going to be in the show and they're going to hear that story. And we hope lives are going to change. So, we went into that with every intention of having the most successful show possible in every way. But our real goal was to change the world.
In speaking of changing the world, I just want to touch on Sammy's personal life for a hot minute because she talks about this publicly on Instagram. Can you tell the story of what just happened with your boyfriend and what he's going through now?
Yeah. So my boyfriend is a humanitarian aid worker. He runs an NGO called Human First Coalition, which came about in August and was created to help get folks who needed to get out of Afghanistan because their lives were in danger out of Afghanistan. And then it sort of moved into providing humanitarian aid for people who are still there, who don't have access to food, shelter, and in many cases, a lot of what we're focusing on now is education. And I am a volunteer for the organization, and we work together on a lot of, the initiatives that he's working on. What you're mentioning specifically is in December, this fall, he made 2 trips back into Afghanistan to facilitate aid. And he was sort of helping to negotiate the control of the airport in Kabul because the airport was really key to getting aid in and out of the country. And he went in with 8 bodyguards. He was there at the invitation of the Taliban. A lot of people, when they hear that, he went to Afghanistan, they were like, why was he in Afghanistan? And it was like, well, someone has to do it. But also he had every reason to believe that he was protected. The senior levels of the Taliban had invited him into the country with, all these assurances of protection. On his second trip on the last day of the trip, he was taken captive by the Taliban. He was held for 105 days. It was horrific. Wow. For the first 17 days, we didn't know if he was alive. And then we didn't have really actual communication with him until about day 45. Even then, it was, very, very difficult. And he was in a 8-foot by 8-foot basement cell, no window. He couldn't see the sun. Very, very bad stuff. But the sort of, culmination of the story is that he's back. It's incredible that he got out. A lot of hostages do not, or it takes a long time, and that he's right back to work. I keep being like, sit down, rest, sit down, but he really wants to keep doing the work because, Afghanistan is deeply in need, and he's also doing a lot of work trying to free fellow hostages. So, a bit different than musical theater.
Does that in any way inform the creative work you're doing right now, Sammi, or that you plan to do in the future?
Yes, it helps me to think a lot about what matters to me in art. And so much of what he does is impact driven. And it makes me think a lot about how I can make sure that the projects that I choose, the projects that I pursue, are also impact driven, that they make the world a better place, much in the way that his work makes the world a better place. But also, I think he is new to Western musical theater. And the more that we sort of talk about my world, the more that we sort of see opportunities to tell stories that could be impactful in the world of his work. So I think, everybody asks us, oh, are you going to make a movie about, his journey? And it's very much something that we're interested in thinking about, but, it's still very fresh. So I think we're figuring out exactly how and with whom and what the right journey is. Also, there are just like a lot of stories in and around this work that telling them might sort of lead to more advocacy and things like that. So yeah, we're trying to figure out how to merge the two worlds to make the greatest possible impact.
Yeah, there's such a story to be told, and in an awareness that can be made of all the humanitarian need. I mean, especially here in the U.S., right? And we're coming off of yet another mass shooting as we're recording this episode right now, and things are so messed up. And I said this all the time when we were in the pandemic and Broadway was shut down. Like I had to keep recording podcasts. I mean, the problems that we face are so small compared to what so many other people face. But like, art heals. We have to be able to express ourselves and connect on a way. Like, it transcends language. It transcends so many things that if we all could just accept each other for who we are, tell stories, enjoy the art as in its most basic form, then, we could come together as a global community in a way that I think we've never been able to before.
This was so lovely. It's a pleasure to officially fully meet you, Dori, and
Yes,
to meet
absolutely.
you, Sammi.
So great to
Thank you.
meet you.
Likewise.
And Alan, always a pleasure.
I'll see you in like an hour, Dori.
Dori gets a special prize.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I love the film. Everyone go watch it. It's on Apple TV. The show must go on. Thank you for the incredible gifts that you give to the world. We know that. We know that art heals. We know that art changes the world. And it's just such a pleasure to see the two of you out there doing that work. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thanks
and
for
thank
having
you for
us.
your great podcast.
Thanks.
It's fabulous.
You're welcome. What a duo, right?
Yeah.
The two of them are two of the most, like I said it during the interview, they are two of the most humble, driven people I have ever had the pleasure of working with. And they do it, like Dori said, they do it for the art. They do it to change the world. They don't do it for a cash grab. Yeah. They're not those people, and they're so well respected.
Yeah, just lovely. They said something that I didn't want to dig into too much because I didn't want to take the focus. I didn't realize you had a production role in the film. How did you? What was your involvement there?
When the COVIDs hit and everything shut down and nobody knew what to do with themselves technologically because we're used to showing up in person, immediately, and this is how the Broadway Podcast Network, how we continue to produce content, we quickly developed a virtual work stream and a virtual studio and a way to, like you and I right now, I'm in New York and you're in Chicago every single time we record for the most part.
Which I've done for 4 years. So it's fascinating to me that was a pivot for all of you.
Well, for the Broadway community in general is one of the last industries from a producing standpoint to change technologically. They want to do things how they've always done. They want to do advertising how they always do it. And this is it's a challenge to get the industry to stay current with tech. And so one of the easy things that we did was immediately pivot to this online thing. And then so when we needed to quickly capture an interview before the opening night, it was literally before opening night. They were holding the house. They couldn't open the house to let people in for opening night of Cats in South Korea because we were recording with Sammi. So I was online. We were on our online recording workflow that was developed, and we were recording Sammi interviewing some footage. So that footage made it into the final documentary. So I got a little credit right at the end. But yeah, that was it. That was all there was. And
there were so many things that I found fascinating. We didn't get to talk about how surreal the footage of a completely empty Times Square. It's wild.
I mean, empty subways, empty Times Squares, empty everything. When literally the marquees being dark, it was a ghost town. It was the emptiest I had ever seen anything of this nature, and it was such a different time.
There is a photo exhibit at the Peggy Notebart Nature Museum here in Chicago. It's a whole wall of photos, and you look at them, you're like, oh, it's Chicago, it's so pretty. And then you look closer, and the question above it is, what's missing? And the answer is people and cars. A whole wall of photos the photographer came out and took were the same thing, no people. I remember that. I remember like there are no people. I remember not putting gas in my car for like 3 months. I get gas every week, which right now at $6 a gallon sucks. Anyway, I love the heart-centered connection. How do we make the world better? I loved Sammi's answer to how her boyfriend's situation is informing art. It's mostly just reminding her to make sure that she's connected, right, with the purpose, the reason that she's doing the work. It's not about sharing his story, although that may come. It's just that reminder of making sure that you have the passion for the work that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's something too. Again, that goes back to like, why are you doing it? Are you doing it for money? Are you doing it for art? Are you doing it for love? If you do it to help other people, then other people are going to help you back. And we say this all the time: a rising tide lifts all ships.
Yeah,
you're going to grow. Everybody else is going to grow when you're all pointed in the same direction for the same reason.
Absolutely. It was a lot of fun. I hope everybody goes and watches and follows everything that these incredible ladies are up to. It was a fun little kismet connection of chance encounter leading to wonderful things between you and Dori and you and me, and
it's just so cool. All the other connections that are out there, like when you dig into this stuff, if you go to Dori's website for her documentary company, dramaticforces.com, you'll see all the stuff she's done, and this is So Must Go On is listed there as well. But like, she's done documentaries on Mark Hamlisch and Carol Channing. She was actually asked to speak at Carol Channing's memorial service when she died, and so like that's how much all of this becomes this giant family of people who are trying to do positive things in the world. So, and SammiCannold.com, SAMMI, Sammi Cannold, of course, this will all be in the show notes.
We're glad you're here, folks. We appreciate that you spend some time with us every couple of weeks. We hope that you will share the episodes with somebody you think it might resonate with. We want to know how you are out embracing chance and opportunity. Tell us. Send us a message. You can find us on Instagram at wasitchance. At wasitchance.
At wasitchance. At wasitchance.
At wasitchance. Send us a DM. Reach out. We want to hear what you're up to. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Was It Chance, the podcast about embracing opportunity and taking intentional risks for your creative life. I'm Alan Seoul.
And I'm Heather Vickery. Bye now. Bye.
How powerful is the Cox network? So powerful that one day the internet will let your doctor perform miracles from thousands of miles away,
Connecting to remote operating room.
giving a whole new meaning to the term house call.
Operation complete.
The Cox network, with gig speeds everywhere. It's internet built for tomorrow, today. Cox, bringing us closer. In Cox serviceable areas, speeds vary and are not guaranteed. Cox terms apply. Other restrictions may apply. How powerful is the Cox network? So powerful that one day the internet will let your doctor perform miracles from thousands of miles away,
Connecting to remote operating room.
giving a whole new meaning to the term house call.
Operation complete.
The Cox network, with gig speeds everywhere. It's internet built for tomorrow, today. Cox, bringing us closer. In Cox serviceable areas, speeds vary and are not guaranteed. Cox terms apply. Other restrictions may apply.